So let's start. So what does fungibility mean? So Bitcoin is like cash. It's immediate and final payment. So that, at least that's the hope. But maybe to add a bit more nuance there. So let's start. So what does fungibility mean? So Bitcoin is like cash. It's immediate and final payment. So that, at least that's the hope. But maybe to add a bit more nuance there, you may have to wait for a few confirmations, or maybe it happens in one confirmation. But generally, once you receive a Bitcoin, you have a Bitcoin, and that's final. And so even with banks and PayPal, who sometimes shut down accounts for trivial reasons or even for no reason at all, it's typically not the case that if somebody who sent you money, so if you were selling something on eBay and somebody bought an item from you and that person had their account shut down, the money that you received would not be removed from your PayPal wallet. And yet this kind of effect that people multiple hops removed from you who are sending you Bitcoins, if they are associated with some trade on Silk Road or something like that, it turns out that some of the exchanges and hosted wallets are using sort of taint tracing services, and up to 4 hops deep away from you, if something is associated with the Silk Road, they will freeze your account and ask you to take your funds and your custom elsewhere. So that, if you look at it from this perspective, the reality is that for people using those services, fungibility in Bitcoin is actually worse than PayPal, because other people's actions which have got nothing to do with you, and you have essentially potentially no connection whatsoever with, 4 hops away is a very long way away. I dare say, potentially just about anybody with Bitcoins in their wallet who have done a few trades are within 4 hops of, anybody in the Bitcoin ecosystem potentially. It's a very interconnected system, like the kind of social networking theory that you're 13 hops from anybody globally. In a Bitcoin network, it's a smaller collection of wallets. So PayPal doesn't freeze your funds if one of your customers' customers use Silk Road, and apparently this is going up to 4 hops within Bitcoin. So another aspect of fungibility is that it's, everybody needs fungibility, or in effect, nobody has it. So that's because your lack of fungibility impacts everyone else. So fungibility costs are externalized. So if you're reusing addresses, that reduces the fungibility of other people's coins. And the usual kind of, I have nothing to hide, so I don't care sort of attitude, which can be true on an individual basis, actually degrades fungibility in Bitcoin generically and for everybody else, so that if the 90% of people who are just buying cups of coffee and don't have any particular privacy requirements take that attitude, there will be very little fungibility left for the remaining users who would like a bit of privacy, and that fungibility failure can leak into the system and affect everybody. So Bitcoin being permissionless, so fungibility can affect permissionless effectively. So Bitcoin's permissionless is a critical feature, and you need fungibility basically for Bitcoin to function. If you receive coins and you can't spend them, you start to doubt whether it's safe to receive money. And if you in a system which there does start to be doubt about coins you received, what people will tend to do is go to the taint tracing service and ask them, are the coins I received good? Do you bless them or not? And if they're not good, you'll send them back or refuse the trade. And so what that basically does is it transitions Bitcoin from a decentralized permissionless system into a centralized permission system where you basically have an IOU from the blacklist providers. So obviously we don't want this to happen. If there's no permission, if you don't have permission to transact, you don't have Bitcoin essentially. And in the worst case, if everybody has to go to a central service to check if their Bitcoins are valid, or if they aren't, they have to sell them at a discount, or that kind of thing. This can eventually lead to a collapse and a loss of confidence. And there are precedents within physical paper money as well. There are court cases in the distant past where this kind of concept, that for a money to be functional, it had to be fungible. And so unlike, there are rules against receiving stolen property. If you unknowingly receive stolen property, like say a work of art or something, turns out it was stolen, you lose, you have to give it back. But with cash, paper money, that's not the case by law in most countries in the world. And this is because of this issue, that if you can't have confidence in receiving currency, then it impacts, it makes the money non-functional and it impacts the economy. So, as I was saying, the attacks, the taint tracing is backwards looking. So it's not so much looking at who received the money, but looking backwards up to 4 hops, who was involved in sending the money, somewhat probabilistically. It's primarily focused on grouping transactions from individual or groups of senders, or the UTXOs, who owns those in the past, spent UTXOs. And this is in part, so there are a series of academic papers you can look up which look at sort of network analysis, and there are factors about the way Bitcoin is used that make this more effective and easier. So the fact that CoinJoin is not that frequently used, so most transactions, all the inputs come from a single owner, that tends to correlate multiple UTXOs as belonging to the same person. Address reuse is obviously bad, and another type of attack is is network address. So when somebody broadcasts a transaction, people will connect to many nodes in the network and try to identify the IP address of the sender. Another aspect is fingerprinting of wallets. So different wallets send slightly different types of transactions, like they might send a multi-sig, or they might send some parameter, so we're going to talk a bit more about those types of fingerprinting issue, which reduce the anonymity set. The anonymity set being a set of potential senders. And transaction censorship is another problem. So now we're going to connect. So fungibility can be in a trade-off with scalability, but there are some situations where fungibility helps scalability. And so we've got these 2 different logos which we'll use to score different techniques as we go through the rest of the paper. And sometimes fungibility brings a large scalability improvement. And an interesting fact is that the reason that fungibility sometimes helps scalability is because fungibility is generally aiming to reduce information leakage. And reducing information leakage means there's less information, and so there's sometimes less information that needs to go in a blockchain, so that's why. And conversely, if we have extremely high scalability in terms of the bandwidth and transaction throughput the network can support, that can also, in the other direction, help fungibility, because we can use some of the types of fungibility that use more data, like ring signatures and confidential transactions. So we talked about address reuse. So that practice has reduced. Most modern wallets are using HD. HD has strong advantages for backup. You do a one-off backup, and then you don't have to ongoing backup and risk losing funds. Another type of address privacy is a stealth address. It hasn't been so much used because it's difficult to find payments to yourself. You basically have to scan the network. So essentially, you either have to be a full node, or you have to rely on a third-party service to scan the network for you. So,
cool. All right, thanks, Adam.